It feels like so much of what we hear about China comes from news headlines and all these political narratives.
Yeah, it's tough to get past that.
So today, I thought we could try something different.
Hmm.
We're going to hear from Mary Lee, a Chinese entrepreneur who's living in Dubai now.
Oh, interesting.
And she's going to offer her perspective on life and culture in China, just from her own experiences. And, I'm thinking this might be a chance to clear our heads a bit.
Oh, definitely. I'm all for that.
Get away from all the noise and
Sure.
think about things a bit differently.
Absolutely, like just hearing from someone directly.
Right. And the thing is, what's really fascinating about this is that it wasn't like a formal interview or anything. This was just a casual conversation between two people
Oh, wow, okay.
from India and China who just wanted to understand each other better.
That's fantastic.
So it really gets to how ordinary people view the world, right?
Yeah, without all the filters.
Instead of, just focusing on the big geopolitical stuff.
That's so refreshing.
And it made me think about something I've noticed. Even though India and China are practically neighbors and have this super long history together, there's this huge curiosity about each other.
It's true. We always want to know more.
Almost like a yearning to connect,
Yeah, definitely.
And we're not really getting that beyond just, the daily headlines.
Right, this quick snippets.
In fact, Mary brought up something right at the beginning that kind of illustrates this distance. She mentioned how hard it is for Chinese tourists to even get visas to visit India.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that difficult.
Yeah, it makes you think about all the missed opportunities for just, normal people to connect and share experiences.
Absolutely. It's a shame.
So to really get into this, I think we should start where Mary's story begins, which is growing up in China. And one of the first things she talked about was the one-child policy, which, as an only child, gives her a really unique perspective.
Right, to hear it from someone who actually lived through it.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that instead of just seeing it as this, top-down rule imposed by the government, she put it in the context of everything China was going through after World War II.
Yeah, that historical perspective is so important.
Especially the widespread food shortages they had. Her grandparents actually lived through some really rough times, and she emphasized that for many people, the policy was a way to make sure the children who were born would have enough to eat
Makes sense.
and, get the care they needed. It wasn't just about keeping the population down. It was about making sure there were enough resources to go around.
So it was about survival, really.
Right. It was this really difficult time, and they were trying to, I guess, secure a better future.
Yeah, make the best of a challenging situation.
Exactly. And what's important here is how different this is from what we usually hear,
Like
right?
the standard criticisms.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For her, it's not just some abstract idea. It comes from these really personal experiences, the struggles that her family and her whole generation went through.
Right, so it becomes much more nuanced than just, this was a bad policy.
Exactly. It makes you think about it in a whole new light. And then, this personal history kind of leads right into her family background.
Okay.
Her parents were from northern China, a mix of Mongolian and Shaanxi heritage. And what really stood out to me was how much they focused on education after China started recovering from the war.
Interesting.
Yeah, she specifically mentioned Deng Xiaoping and how much he emphasized education as the way forward for China. And this wasn't just, her parents being ambitious. It was this whole national push to rebuild and modernize.
Wow, so it was a real cultural shift.
Totally. It laid the foundation for everything that's happened in China in the past few decades.
It's amazing how those early decisions can shape an entire nation.
Right. And that kind of brings us to this really interesting point. The connections between India and China, historically and culturally, you might be surprised by how much they actually share.
I'm ready to be surprised. Tell me more.
So beyond the obvious things, like both being huge countries with ancient civilizations and, a lot of national pride, there are these really specific cultural links.
Oh, wow, like what?
Well, for example, she talked about the journey to the West, which is this epic tale that's like a cornerstone of Chinese culture, kind of like how the Ramayana and Mahabharata are for India.
Oh, I see, these big foundational stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And in the journey to the West, there's this super popular character, the Monkey King, Sun Wukong.
I've heard of him. Isn't there a video game about him too?
Yes, Black Myth, Wukong. It's gotten a ton of attention lately.
Oh, that's right. I saw something about that.
But what's really cool is that there are these different ideas about where the Monkey King character came from.
Oh, really?
Some people see connections to Hanuman in Hindu mythology.
Huh. That makes sense. They're both, powerful monkey figures. Yeah.
Right. And even though they acknowledge that there are different origin stories and cultural nuances, They both recognized how this archetype of a strong, clever, and a bit mischievous monkey figure shows up in both cultures.
It's so interesting how those similar themes pop up in different places.
Yeah. It makes you think about those universal stories that resonate with people everywhere.
Absolutely. Like we're all connected somehow.
And then there's the historical side of things. India was actually seen as a holy land, Tianzu, in Chinese, within Buddhist teachings.
Oh, right, because of the journeys to India to bring back Buddhist scriptures.
Exactly.
And of course, Buddha himself was from India, which adds another layer to that connection.
Yeah, India holds this huge spiritual importance in Buddhist history, and that's had a lasting impact on Chinese culture over centuries.
It's amazing how intertwined those histories are.
What's really interesting is that this idea of shared values goes beyond just formal religion. Mary mentioned that even though a lot of younger people in China today might not actively practice Buddhism or any religion, there's still this strong belief in karma.
Oh, interesting. So it's become more of a cultural concept?
It seems like it. And they still emphasize ethical behavior, doing the right thing.
That's a pretty powerful idea, that sense of cause and effect and moral responsibility.
Totally. So when you look deeper, you see all these historical and cultural connections between India and China that you might not expect.
Yeah, it's definitely more complex than just what we see on the surface.
So now let's shift gears a bit and talk about China today. Mary shared some really interesting insights into the government and society there. She mentioned that there's a strong sense of patriotism.
Okay, I've definitely heard that before.
It seems to be pretty widespread, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone agrees with every single thing the government does.
Right, those are two different things. You can be proud of your country, but still have your own opinions.
Exactly. She really made that distinction. Like, there's this deep love for their country and its history, but that doesn't mean they're blindly following everything.
Makes sense. It's like anywhere else, right? People have different views.
Totally. And she also talked about Xi Jinping and how visible he is, making those public appearances, visiting factories and communities.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those photos.
It's like they're trying to show that the leadership is in touch with the people, that they understand their everyday lives.
Interesting. It's a way to project a certain image, I guess.
Aye. And then on the topic of religion, it seems like Buddhism is still really influential in China, especially because of how popular stories like Journey to the West are.
Right, that makes sense.
But Mary also pointed out that there are more and more people who don't identify with any specific religion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is interesting because, like we said earlier, those ideas of karma and ethical behavior are still really strong.
So it's like those values have kind of transcended the religious aspect?
Yeah, it's more like a moral compass now. And she even told this story about a Chinese woman in Beijing who was actually promoting Hinduism.
Wow. Okay.
Which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty surprising. It shows that there's definitely some openness to different beliefs.
It's like they're curious,
Yeah.
open to exploring different ideas.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then, talking about the government's role, Mary mentioned that things like basic medication are free with insurance, and that everyone gets 9 years of free education no matter where they live.
Okay, so there's a focus on social welfare.
Yeah, and that includes minority regions like Tibet. It's kind of a different side of things that we don't always hear about.
It's good to get that broader perspective.
Speaking of Tibet, that was another topic that came up. Mary explained the official stance, which is that Tibet is a part of China.
Right, that's the official line.
But she also talked about how diverse China is as a whole,
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge country with so many different groups.
Exactly. It's not just one homogeneous culture. There are all these different ethnic and linguistic groups like Mongolian, Uyghur, Tibetan.
It's easy to forget that when we're talking about it as one big entity.
Right. And she even shared some personal stories about Chinese people visiting Tibet for, spiritual retreats, and how some of them had really positive interactions with the Tibetan people.
That's interesting. So there's that personal connection, too.
But she was also very open about the fact that there are different perspectives, especially the ones we often hear in Indian media,
About Tibetan independence and those concerns.
Exactly. And she admitted that it's really hard for anyone to know the full truth about all of this, especially with things like the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama and how all those leadership changes have been portrayed.
Right, it's all very complicated and politically charged.
It's just a reminder that there's more to the story than what we might see in the headlines. And then they briefly talked about those border issues that India and China have had, including the war back in the early 60s and then the clash a few years ago.
Yeah, that's always a sensitive topic.
And again, they acknowledged that Both countries have their own narratives and media coverage, so it's hard to get a completely objective view.
Right, there's always bias involved.
But from Mary's point of view, as just an ordinary citizen, she really wants peace and mutual respect between the two countries.
Yeah, who wouldn't?
She's hoping for positive relations instead of, more conflict. And she pointed out that China's been focusing on their own economic development lately, trying to improve things for their own people.
Hmm.
So it seems like expanding their territory isn't really a priority right now.
Interesting. So the focus is more inward.
Yeah, growth and stability within their own borders.
Oh.
And then the conversation kind of moved on to media, which is really different in China compared to what we're used to.
In what way?
Well, they have these platforms like Douyin, Youku, and Bilibili, which are huge there.
Okay, I've heard of doing it's like TikTok, right?
Yeah, but things like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook are blocked in China.
Wow, that's a big difference.
And the fact that some people use VPNs to access those sites shows that there's still a desire to see what's happening outside of China.
You have to get different perspectives.
Right. They also talked about how American media portrays China and vice versa, and how that's kind of similar to how India and China sometimes portray each other negatively.
Yeah, it's like that us versus them mentality that media often creates.
Exactly. And Mary expressed this hope for more balanced and positive media coverage between India and China, like showing the everyday lives of people instead of always focusing on the conflicts.
Yeah, humanizing each other instead of demonizing.
Right. And then getting into more day-to-day life, they talked about dating in China, which it seems is pretty pragmatic.
Pragmatic.
Yeah, like they really think about things like careers and family when choosing a partner.
Oh, so it's not all about romance.
Well, maybe not as much as in some other cultures. But she did mention that younger people are starting to change things up a bit. They're more focused on individual happiness and, maybe not following tradition as strictly.
Interesting. So there's a bit of a generational shift happening.
Yeah, exactly. And then speaking of tradition,
Yeah.
they talked about how parents in China are super strict about dating when kids are in school.
Oh, I bet that's familiar to a lot of people in India, too.
Right. And then all of a sudden, after university, there's this pressure to get married.
Yeah, that's a pretty universal experience, I think.
Totally. And when they talked about how Chinese people view Indians, it seems like most people prefer to marry within their own nationality.
Okay, makes sense.
But she did say that there's definitely openness, and personal connections can change things.
Right. Love knows no boundaries.
Exactly. Now, this part was kind of fun. They talked about Bollywood's influence in China. It turns out Aamir Khan is super popular there, especially his movie 3 Idiots.
Oh, I love that movie.
She also mentioned, though, that the whole singing and dancing thing in Bollywood movies is kind of funny to some Chinese audiences at first.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique style.
And they talked about other actors, too, like Salman Khan and Hrithik Roshan. But she did point out that it's hard to translate those Indian names into Chinese accurately.
Oh, yeah, I bet that's a challenge.
Remember that massive wedding Ambani had?
Oh, yeah, the one that was all over the news?
Well, that got a lot of attention in China, too.
What did people think?
Some thought it was way too over the top, but others saw it as a sign of India's economic power.
Yeah, kind of showing off what they're capable of.
Exactly. And Mary mentioned that the Ambani family's businesses and all their philanthropy probably play into how people perceive them.
Right, their whole image.
One thing that the interviewer was curious about was vegetarianism in China. Mary assured him that there are plenty of vegetarian options, which they call shukai,
Oh, good to know.
and there are even dedicated vegetarian restaurants, including some in Muslim communities in places like Ningxia.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's interesting because a lot of people worry about finding vegetarian food in China, but it seems like it's not that hard.
That's reassuring.
Yeah, and she even mentioned that she was vegetarian herself growing up.
Oh, cool.
Finally, they talked a bit about how Chinese people view Indian food. There's definitely some curiosity, but a lot of people have this idea about Indian street food being, well, not so great.
Oh, no.
I know, right? But she did say that she's had really good experiences in higher-end Indian restaurants, especially in Dubai. So it seems like it really depends on where you go and what you try.
That makes sense.
Looking towards the future, Mary talked about all the technological advancements happening in China, especially in AI and things like flying cars, which are apparently a thing now.
Flying cars. Seriously.
Seriously, it sounds crazy, right?
Uh-huh.
But the main thing is that they're really focused on internal development, trying to make life better for everyone in China.
It's like they're on this fast track to the future.
Totally. And she's hopeful that there will be more tourism and, just people-to-people exchanges between India and China in the future.
Yeah, more of those personal connections we were talking about.
Exactly. And, after listening to all of this, it just really hit me how important it is to hear directly from individuals when we're trying to understand another culture.
Absolutely. It's so easy to get stuck in those broad generalizations and media narratives.
Right. And this conversation was so full of little details and insights that you would never get from just reading a news article.
Totally. It really challenged my own assumptions about China.
Mine too.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that even though there are definitely differences, there are also these amazing similarities that connect us all.
Yeah, it's like we're all just human beings trying to figure things out.
Exactly. And sometimes just listening to someone else's story can make a huge difference.
It really can.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you soon with another one.